Hi everyone, welcome to Virtual Cafe Week 2. Thank you for joining us. And welcome to Nicholas Pontes from the University of Queensland and John Gregg from Western Sydney University. And welcome to students from wherever you are. I can see quite a few Swinburne students. And I'd like to introduce Roger Correia from, got that nearly.
You did well.
From IBIS World, who's presenting for us today, and he's based at IBIS here in Melbourne, which of course is the main city in Australia, as we all know. So
the main city for COVID.
Yeah, thanks. Look, it's absolutely wonderful to have you, Roger, and it's wonderful to have your input into the Advertising Capstone Challenge. I know you presented on campus last year, and thank you for returning and joining us for this national delivery. We have around 180 students, thereabouts, maybe up to 200 across the 3 universities in the Advertising Capstone Challenge. And research is a fundamental part of their early stage research when they address the brief. And as I already outlined to you, they're very lucky this year. We've got a great client. We've got Suzuki Australia, and through their consultancy, Deloitte Digital. So we've got a very challenging brief for them, and they're really going to have to be on top of the research. So situational analysis is probably the first step. Certainly at Swinburne, it's one of the first things that we look at. So thank you for joining us today, and I think I'll just hand over to you.
Thanks, David. Hi guys. To give you some background on me and perhaps...
We can't see you, Roger, by the way.
Do you want to see me?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. How's that?
Yay.
So some background on me and my relationship with IBIS World. Myself, aside from managing some of these relationships with the academic institutions in Australia, I also manage quite a lot of larger businesses in the country, primarily in the banking, education, as well as professional services sectors. Now, today, what I'm doing for you guys is pretty much giving you a quick overview of IBIS World and its relationship to situational analysis from our perspective. We've also, I've also cherry-picked a few of our slides from a presentation we did on Friday last week. Now, the reason why I'm going to be presenting that today is after David gave me the brief for your capstone challenge. These slides, in my opinion, kind of gave a good understanding of where we're at in the market right now. And perhaps we'll give you some perspective on how to address the your project moving forward. Now, I won't have the chat bar up and running. So if there's anything that comes up in there, just let me know if you need me to stop or anything like that. So let's get started because we've got quite a few slides to run through. Now, what I'll be doing today, like I mentioned before, I'll give you a quick overview of our company, what we do. Hopefully it'll build some credibility on, our content. And perhaps you're obviously not going to be using IBIS World as your primary source of information, let's hope. But of course, it'll hopefully build some credibility around what we do and where we kind of sit in, I guess, in respect our relationship to situational analysis. I'll quickly touch on different types of situational analysis. Hopefully it's all stuff you already know. And of course, why it matters in respect to IBIS World. Of course, how it applies. And lastly, which is going to be a fair chunk of the session today, is really going to be on that update on the economy. Now, us as a company, we've been around since 1971. These days, we're global. We cover a ton of primary markets all over the world. Aside from just Australia, our coverage covers across New Zealand, the US, Canada, the UK, China, global markets too. We've now expanded, I think since last year actually, into Ireland, Mexico, and we're looking into additional European markets as well. Now, in Australia, our content covers about 760 industries. You'll see this term floating around called ANZIC. It's how Australia, as a matter of fact, categorizes industries. Just be aware that we might be talking to those standards today. Now, our reports, they cover anything from pig farming right down to software retailing. So anything in between as well. But our information is used extensively in pretty much all across the market, whether it's something like manufacturing, blue collar, right up to white collar areas, and all those other aspects in between as well. In respect to situational analysis, you've got all different types of situational analysis, whether it's C analysis, SWOT analysis, of course, PEST, PESTLE, Porter's 5 Forces too. How this actually ties in, and the most important part for IBIS World, is this quote here, which comes from Michael Porter, which is really alluding to the fact that 19% of a company's profitability is really determined in their external environment and in that industry they operate in. So how this ties in, situational analysis as that foundation, as that starting point, it'll really help you determine the health of the business right now outside the financial aspect of the business. Of course, it'll let you address those factors outside your control. And of course, lets us prioritize the issues or the strengths that have the most significance to that project or the business in that current point. And of course, lastly, it lets you enhance your current position or enhance any traits or even issues that might be in the market at that point in time. How we apply? So our analysis complements most situational analysis frameworks to really help, make those better business decisions. And of course, really provide insight into the first significant influence around a company, which relates to the industry. Now, the last point, and probably I would argue the most important one for you guys here with using our content, is that it remains highly critiqued throughout all our current client base. That's enough of talk about IBIS World. I'm going to go into the nitty gritty. So this is the point where you should start paying attention. So I'm going to give you a quick economic update on the market where we're at right now. Our senior analyst, Tom Yule, generated this through quite a bit of research to give us some perspective on where the market's at in its current position. So just jumping straight into it. Quick update on GDP. We've revised down our 2021 GDP forecast from 1% to 2%. This is due to the second wave of COVID in Victoria specifically, and overall a more draw out of the crisis than initially expected. However, stronger than expected export results and a weaker than estimated effect of the bushfires meant that we've had to upward adjust our 2019-2020 GDP result slightly. There's no denying though that a recession is pretty much still imminent. It's taken some time though for consumer confidence to trend down. When we last updated the market in April, the bushfires have since had a far greater downward effect on confidence than the COVID-19 pandemic. So initially, robust government stimulus gave Australians some cause for optimism looking forward. However, the prolonged crisis, ongoing media coverage of the unfolding economic toll, and now the second wave in Victoria have really rattled consumers. So that challenge for businesses over the next 12 months will be to really navigate that cautious landscape. Now, this is probably a very interesting slide to talk about. Unemployment is forecasted to rise strongly. So the related fall in household incomes and therefore spending power will be one of the biggest challenges to businesses over the next 2 to 3 years. Most recent unemployment release in June puts the rate at 7.4%. So these are ABS figures. So some other releases suggest 7.1%. Peak unemployment still to come, likely upon the removal of government assistance packages. Thankfully, though, these are seeming to be weaned off over time quite steadily. So rather than the quick drop off, which was originally proposed, but the effective unemployment rate of 13.3% is very troubling. The gap in between this and the employment rate, or just in isolation, the seemingly low unemployment rate, is due to a decline in workforce participation. So in other words, an individual has to be actively seeking work to be classified as unemployed. The job seeker and job keeper payments kind of explain part of this participation fall, but low job advertisements opportunities are discouraging job hunting activity on the other side. Now, this is probably one of the most obvious ones, but deserves a lot of mention as well, is the shift to online. It won't be a shock to a lot of you guys that online media platforms and retail are doing well when we're mostly confined to our homes. The graph on the right demonstrates clearly the surge in online retail in share of total expenditure terms. So a quick note for you guys, the ABS does tend to understate online retail expenditure compared with other sources. For instance, the ABS says online retail at 7% of retail pre-outbreak, while some other sources, at that rate that at 10%. So the second and more surprising part of this story is the overall rise in retail expenditure. For a nation about to enter a recession, this isn't a typical spending pattern. We don't know why this has occurred, but some points are that the shift to work from home and lockdown life boosted sales of obviously hardware, electronics, and particularly for some people, liquor. But the April dip was then followed by a 2-month rise, which is well above pre-outbreak levels. The cause of the May and June rises, again, quite counterintuitive, are more opaque. The possible factors here, one's probably the inability to spend on services of pretty much any nature, so travel, beauty, restaurants, bars, so on, has pushed spending into the consumption of goods. Second, for some working from home, daily expenses such as transit, lunch, those sort of traditional spend have completely fallen. So while national income has fallen, the spending power of the employed in a retail sense has increased quite strongly. Now, network usage is probably, we know it's increased, but it's increased drastically. You guys might recall the bandwidth issues over the last few months that a lot of big companies had to address, particularly like Netflix, YouTube, all video on demand services, where they were having to limit video quality to reduce pressure on national infrastructure. This growth was as much as 129% higher reported in early May. So online traffic has partially normalized in the current months, but remains elevated. So lockdown and isolation have changed many service sectors. Fitness classes have moved online, as well as you guys with education classes, for example. All your general services like the pokies or gambling services have all shifted to online services as well. Most software or as a service companies have had, their pool of potential customers grow. Video on demand, gaming services, online gaming, have had substantial increases in growth. Now, if you look here in terms of online traffic, You'll see the orange line over here is related to COVID-19 articles, blue line, just general articles, everything else. What we can see is a lot of COVID content being consumed. So for scale, that's about a 50% in total, 50% rise in total page views. However, consumption of non-COVID articles just really has not suffered at all. Probably could argue that there's been a marginal increase in all other articles as well. I guess the key takeaways, we know service expenditure has fallen to the benefits of retailers, mainly online, but store-based too. We know screen time and media consumption are up. It's also extremely likely that further pain regarding unemployment and household incomes and expenditure is coming. So historically, online share of retail expenditure has hardly ever fallen in 2 consecutive months. That's pretty significant. So why is this relevant in the COVID environment? So although online operators' share of expenditure has grown strongly, recent trends are positive for overall retail. However, this current situation is not likely to be sustained. You know, JobKeeper, JobSeeker, mortgage holidays, for example, rent moratoriums are keeping the economy afloat, but in many respects, kind of delaying the pain. It's not the end of times bad, but competition for consumer expenditure is going to intensify over the next couple of years. So further to this, restaurants, cafes, gyms, you know, all those sorts of recreational activities we used to do are likely to reopen at some point too. So with elevated unemployment, that pie of household expenditure is going to shrink. So once service industries reopen, we expect consumer expenditure to strongly swing away from retail. There's some early data to suggest this. June retail showed states with the lowest COVID cases saw weak or declining retail expenditure. In contrast, Victoria and New South Wales reported the strongest growth. So all businesses are going to have sound strategies and be near perfect in positioning their brands in the marketplace. So consumer shift to online is expected to be mostly lasting, with a bit of correction back to store-based retailing, as shown by the dip in online retail share of expenditure once lockdown measures have been reduced in some states. I can't say this enough. Brand is going to become more important than ever. So digital acceleration is going to allow companies to have near complete control of their brand, you know, messaging, how they interact with customers. Digital ad clicks and email open rates have increased modestly since the outbreak of COVID as targeted and personalized promotions become more prevalent. This trend is set to continue. Digital acceleration also offers businesses broader opportunities too. Like we look at things like loyalty programs, they're not exactly new, but data is making them increasingly effective and valuable. So many large companies, including Telstra, BP, have recently rolled out in-house loyalty programs. Though that data that they're collecting, those analytics are really playing an increasingly becoming a huge part of these loyalty programs. In many cases, the customer data is the big draw card of running this sort of program rather than the use as a revenue generator. And analytics and profiling is just massive and useful in many ways. Just an interesting example we've seen recently from an online operator which profiled customers and found a location with a high concentration of what they considered high value customers. Sending out a pop-up store to that location in the region increased their sales dramatically using that analytics, using the analytics to direct how they sold. So competition is going to be heightened over the next couple of years, economy-wide. So therefore, ongoing relevant, personalized communication with customers is going to be crucial. After sales service is key. finding out what worked well as any, you know, sticking points in the purchase process is vital. We have to make things easy to buy. And of course, you know, improving that customer satisfaction and elongating that post-purchase, you know, happiness is going to be very important. Now, there's a couple more points here as well, which kind of talk to, I guess, noise in competitive service industries. Like, you know, B2B as a whole is altogether changing, but I guess from this conversation, this presentation, especially on the online part, it's very much worth stressing to you guys that we're pretty much on one platform at the moment, where online is the major one. Being effective in your promotion, ensuring that your promotion sticks through, I guess, effective communication really is paramount moving forward. And we touched on before about having that after sales glow, where being happy with the purchase and trying to elongate that happiness with a potential purchase over as long a period as you can is very important. We talk about things like word of mouth being a very, very huge aspect of, you know, a positive referral and a driver of business that continues to be very, very important, especially now too. But that's it from me. That brings us to the end.
Thank you, Roger. That's absolutely excellent. Really, really interesting background, contextual presentation. Thank you for your time, Roger.
Not a problem. Imagine if I was on mute the whole time.
Can I just ask you to stop sharing, or however
Yes.
you and great, excellent. And I'll just open the floor to the students that are here and to see if there's any questions. It can be chat or it can be audio, or, you know, you can turn your cameras on, guys, if you'd like to. You're welcome to. I think we've got the bandwidth.
I might ask a question.
Yeah, go for it, John.
Yes, Roger, you're talking about the focus on brand as opposed to retail moving into COVID. Why is that? Given, you know, if you look at Bunnings and you know, retailers like that, the shift has gone, you know, up, obviously because a lot of people have been working from home, etc. During the lockdown period. So why the focus on brand more so than the actual retail?
See, I deleted that slide because I had a slide that was talking to those changes.
Yeah.
So we see, you know, trades like hardware, for example, personal services increasing over this sort of period, video on demand increasing as well. They're primarily driven by, I guess, people being stuck at home and not having any other options right now. It's not a case of one versus the other, but definitely the case that from your perspective here in this particular project, brand is going to be paramount. I wouldn't say it's a comparison of it being better than retail, but now that we move to our messaging primarily being over, you know, online media as the example, the messaging itself is very, very important to the brand.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah, hope I answered that well.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I understand that. Thank you.
I have a question, Roger. Are you able to hear me?
Yeah, I can hear
Yes.
someone. Can't see someone, but I don't know where. Oh, there you
Meg.
are.
Yep.
Hi. I was just wondering if you have any form of demographic or psychographic breakdown of the people who are part of the large jump in the retail spending online.
I don't personally, but I can ask. Tom's our specialist in retail. So what did you want, the demographics in the retail spend?
Yeah. Any kind of target profile breakdown that you have of that would be helpful.
Sure.
You can send that to me, Roger. That Meg's one of my students. Well,
Okay.
unless you've moved
You can-
universities, Meg.
You can share. David, you can share.
Yeah, well, of course, we can absolutely. Yeah, it's an open forum. So, you know, it's a great question, Meg. It's a great
Yeah.
question, yeah.
Definitely. I think I'll get you those demographics if they're available. I think like when Tom and I spoke about this yesterday, there's some key aspects there that need to be highlighted. I mean, while, you know, if you're looking at it from the demographics, that's fine. But if you go back a high level, before we look at, you know, who's spending within that pool, there are those two aspects at the moment of, you know, the employed, me, you guys, a lot of you guys at the moment. Aside from us, there is that unemployment side as well. And I think there's a lot of gray area right there, right now, that's going to be revealed in the coming months, a year, where we start to see who actually has the money to spend at the moment. That point I mentioned earlier about having, I guess, that household income, that pool, which will start to shrink. I think that's going to show a lot. In this case here, where we're looking at working with Suzuki for this advertising challenge here, I think there's a lot of insight to be had, to be learned from this exercise, where we start to see where exactly there's money to be had, where there are buyers really. I'll find out for you regarding the demographics, but I find there's just a lot of gray area in the market right now in terms of consumer spend.
Thank you.
The floor is open, guys. So questions from anywhere. Roger, I've got a question, and it's more a thought really, more than a question, because I guess analysis is all about what's happening today and what's happening in the last 12 months and where's the market been. It's how it's been impacted by COVID-19. And I think the problem moving forward is, because the campaign they're doing is 2021. So I think everyone's trying to think very positively. You know what I mean? So by 2021, we're going to nut this thing. You know what I mean? We're going to be on top of this thing, and there's going to be money. But but I think that's a false reality in some respects. And I'm just wondering, and I think you hold this issue of the grey area. We actually don't know. We don't know what the market's going to be like in 12 months' time. And so there's so many unknowns. And I'm just thinking that the data of today is almost impossible to think about that trend 12 months' time.
Yep. So I'll give you some perspective. We've got a collection. I think in one of my earliest slides, I talked to the markets that we write in, right? There's about 3,000 industry reports that we write in globally. Now, us as a company, by about March, we looked at the market globally and really realized that all our forecasting was now out of whack. The model was just gone. So we've had to go in and update every single title in our global collection with amended performance figures. Now, what that tells us is that I guess the effect of an economic downturn, plus at the same time a global pandemic, has really thrown things out of whack. But that doesn't really spell a case of disaster. It just means that there's going to be a downturn coming. Australia is probably one of the better countries out there in being able to, I guess, dull that impact. So from our perspective, forecast often, predict often. Look at the information as often as you can, because information is changing daily. You can have one little parameter that can affect a whole ton of other ones. So my advice is just keep looking out for content, because your research today might differ from tomorrow, but just keep looking often.
I just want to share with you something that Robert, I think his name was Rosengarten, who's the assistant marketing manager at Suzuki Australia, shared with us yesterday. I think it's what he said, but he said, I'm just looking at my notes. He said to me, at the moment, the market in car sales is down 19%, and we're in August, aren't we? But he said their company was doing slightly better, and they were down 15. So, you know, and we haven't even really hit the recession yet. You know what I mean? And I'm thinking, so that's really interesting. So they're actually performing better to the average, and obviously some businesses in the vehicle sector are actually down a lot if they're actually above that.
Yes. So I've been speaking quite heavily with a lot of the car companies. Like I said earlier, there is a gray area there, and JobKeeper and JobSeeker are having an impact on that performance, on the, I guess, the dulling of that bad performance. We don't know as yet. I mean, you think about as each state goes back to some, I guess, easing back of restrictions, car sales are going to increase again. The car industry has suffered quite greatly with coronavirus because it's a hands-on industry. You know, the amount of hands that go through a car before you even get your hands on the vehicle itself is massive. You know, test driving a car itself has just made the industry completely change in how they actually manage the process to actually get a car to a consumer. So you take that into account, the structural, I guess, changes they've had to make, plus the reduced demand over this period, has and will have had a huge impact. From every conversation I've had, though, with car manufacturers, you know, it paints a different picture to the dire picture I had in my head of how the car industry would travel. So they're doing a lot better than we expected them to back when we were forecasting in March. So that's the good thing here.
Yeah. I wonder if that 4% variation in the market there, I would imagine, and I don't know if you've done any research around this or asked, what about fleet sales in cars? Like if you think about businesses and companies, I would imagine they'd be quite nervous about upgrading their fleets or renewing their fleets, given they don't know what's going to be happening with their workforce moving forward. So I would imagine most companies would be quite holding off on, you know, renewing their leases on fleets or upgrading their fleets as well.
Perhaps initially. I've been talking to the financiers in the fleet market. There's 3 big ones I've spoken to in the last couple of months. They're busy. So whether it's a case of them being busy because they have to justify each sale a bit more, or from their perspective, they're just busy, they're just doing well. It's not a ugly conversation that we're having with them. It's more a case of we need more information to justify, I guess, where this market's going. And it's often a case of surprise that I'm having those conversations with them. So yeah. While initially we expected a clear downturn from a B2B perspective, they've actually come back okay. So you think about it from a financier's perspective, right? Each car company generally will have a lending company on the side as well. So Mitsubishi Australia would have Mitsubishi Finance, Toyota would have Toyota Finance. So these companies can pretty much diversify. The problem where we see a weak point would be with the dealerships, the ones that can't diversify their sales. That's probably where it's going to be. But like you say, like it hasn't been as bad as projected. Like I know for a fact that Toyota's conversations we've had with companies like Toyota and Mitsubishi and so forth, they're not as dire as we I personally would have thought.
You paint a very positive picture. Good. There's another question from someone. Is it Meg again, or?
Yeah. I was just thinking
and
because
Renee,
in your charts that you were showing us earlier with a trend over the past couple of decades, and obviously there was a high point with the recession in the early 90s, and then a slight point in the global financial crisis that Australia mainly managed to survive through. Is there anything that we can learn from those points of time of unemployment and perhaps apply to our planning for 2021?
Well, probably the biggest learning point, and something that's harped on from the very highest point of our business right down to the bottom point of our business, is that it's all a cycle and it will always bounce back. There's always money to be spent. And as long as that cycle keeps going, we're okay. I can't remember the year of how far the information goes back, but our founder of our company did the first profile, I think, in 1971. And since then, it's just been a cycle over and over. And that's when you split it down by those industries, say you broke it down by those 500 different industries, it's like all different waves that kind of level out to performance. So I guess that's probably the biggest point I'd say here, is that it's going to be okay. There'll be tough times ahead, but spending will increase on the other side.
What was the lag time with the GFC? What was the lag time between the hit of GFC and the markets, starting to be affected by that? I mean, we all knew the news, like in that October, the news was all breaking about what was happening in the States and the companies. But the impact was really a good 6 months later, wasn't it? Is that correct?
I personally don't have that information in front of me, but like I say, I can find out.
Yeah.
Okay. But if I remember correctly, Australia got the nice insulation there.
Yes, so, that's right. The government reacted again quite quickly, didn't they?
Yeah.
At the time.
And recovery was quite quick as well. So. Yeah.
Okay.
Meg, can I just ask you to email me on what you just said, because I just had an idea. I want to email you. A question for Renee.
Hi, Roger. You were saying before about the importance of brand and how prevalent it's going to be. And I was wondering, how does IBIS World measure that? Is more of a top of mind thing during consumer research and that sort of thing?
So our analysts are pretty much on the market at all times. So aside from just keeping in touch and speaking to companies within the market, we have a huge presence with industry associations across the retail sector, as well as the online space as well. So as a trend overall, with when we're looking at key external drivers like shift in, buying patterns as the example, and the competitiveness of each individual industry, we also look at, say you might look at profit margins within the industry as one of those parameters, right? When you drive down with all those external drivers, you kind of figure out, say, for example, if we're looking at an industry that's highly saturated by businesses, the industry itself is very competitive, and profit margins are quite slim. Brand is going to be extremely important, because if you've got like-for-like products out there, it's very easy for someone to choose. So in a market where you've got a lot of comparable products, that's when we say brand is going to be extremely important, because if you're fighting for less, forms of media to actually get in front of a consumer, that messaging is going to be paramount in delivering the right message to the end user. So those other points as well, in terms of having that lasting satisfaction with the client, drives those other aspects too. Like, for example, the referrals, getting referrals from a client. We say it's probably the most important one out of all of them in terms of the impact all of those come together to kind of give you a pretty obvious duh moment of brand is essential at that point.
Yeah. Thank you.
That's right.
Yeah, I just wanted to just coming on top of that, and if I just link back to what Adrian Mills said yesterday from Deloitte Digital, and I think it links to what you were saying, Roger, in some respects about the importance of brand and what in particular Deloitte thinks Suzuki needs or what they're searching for. I mean, they already have, I'd say the new campaign or the new strapline for fun's sake is actually quite a simple but big concept. And for what I got from, this is my take, what I got from Adrian and possibly also Daniel and Robert yesterday was, they think it must be simple and big because it's got to have cut through in what they see as, I think, a very competitive industry. You know, motor vehicle sales, it's, you know, I think it's tough out there, but they seem to be doing all right comparatively. But, you know, I guess, you know, they're trying to think 12 months down the line, will they still have that breakthrough ability? And so maybe they need to enhance what they're already doing. That's how I sort of read it at the moment. But you're right, it's got to have a sharper presence in the consumer mind.
Yeah.
Roger might know this, but I think Australia is the most competitive car market in the world, isn't it? Because of the volume of brands that we have in the marketplace for the population. I mean, there's every car maker in the marketplace with quite a few variants.
Look, I'm no expert in this, but I would debate that.
Yeah.
Our tax system, the way we tax cars, is not exactly standardized across the market, where you've got European cars being taxed more so than Japanese cars, as the example, or Korean cars. Those sort of tariffs, they don't help competition. In Australia, for example, we know that there isn't much profit margins in car sales anyway. We know that the majority of that that revenue is driven from post-sales service. So I wouldn't say, like, I personally wouldn't say it's the most competitive, but to your point, I think it kind of supports your point in that the profit margins are extremely low.
Yeah. Okay.
That's interesting. Okay, guys, any questions from any other student, like students from Western Sydney or University of Queensland, if they're with us? Or any questions from you, Nicholas, at all?
No, I'm just listening to the talk, and I actually like the questions. I did have a question, but it was already answered. So if I think anything, I'll say.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, I think if I'll just leave it for a couple of minutes. So last questions call, really, I think. Unless you'd like to wrap it up in any sort of way, Roger. Oh, I've got another question from Meg. Great.
Yeah. Sorry. Lots of questions. I just have one. Because I was thinking that Australia is quickly, I think, do we have any car manufacturers left in Australia, or are they all overseas? And has this had any effect on the market?
Well, we don't have any Australian car manufacturers in Australia.
Yeah.
Well, we don't have any Australian manufacturing for cars, right? The only thing we've got now is modifications, and modifications somehow is growing as an export market as well. So that's perhaps, I guess, does that answer your question?
To an extent. So it's interesting about the car modifications as an export growth. That was something I wasn't aware of. But I was wondering if it created a sway in consumers from going, oh, I'll buy this car because it's made in Australia by Australians, because they no longer have that option, has it created any form of change in opinion?
I would 100% argue yes, because we don't have diehard supporters for car manufacturers anymore. That's a thing of the past. You have European.
Surely there's some Holden and Ford favourites around Australia.
Well, but
We've got a Ford in the driveway.
Yeah, but they're not. None of them are made here anymore. There's no manufacturing, so there's no local, sort of word on your sleeve.
There's no allegiances anymore in that sense,
yeah,
right?
Exactly, Roger. Yeah.
So the European car manufacturers are driving their pricing down in order to compete. They've still got upward pressures with tax, for example. You've got your Korean manufacturers increasing their quality and they're about increasing how they're perceived by the Australian marketplace. And then you've got the Japanese manufacturers that are just sitting there in the middle. There is no, I guess, allegiance, I would say, anymore like there was in the past. I think consumers are a lot smarter today by being able to, I guess, look at their resources that are available to them in order to find a brand that is fairly agnostic in comparison to how they would have purchased before. Like, gone are the days where your dad bought a Ford, so you bought a Ford.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And I suppose the only one I can think of, it's number one in the market is Toyota. And I suppose they've just been around for so long. And, the vehicles like the Land Cruiser and the Prado and the Corolla kind of have an Australian feel about them, simply because they've been in the market for so long, since the 60s.
I am seeing, I would say keep an eye out on Toyota, because they've had pressure coming from Correia through Hyundai and Kia, and there's Chinese brands coming out of the woodwork at the moment. They've had this pressure coming at them that has kind of pushed them in a better direction, which is kind of reflected in their cars in the last couple of years, and in the cars coming over the next couple of years as well. That's pushing them. Like, Toyota's always been known for quality, reliability, but now they're kind of catching up to their European counterparts in terms of the creature comforts, I would say. I'd say they're definitely a company to watch, as compared to watching someone like Kia or a Hyundai, who we know are going to be heavy hitters in the next couple of years. I think the companies like Toyota are very important.
Yeah.
Roger, I do have maybe a final question here, and just building on John's comment there about the different types of cars. So I know the reports are more industry based, but just from your experience in talking to these auto car companies and your understanding of this industry in particular, have you seen any shift, even though the industry hasn't performed as badly as we would think, but have you seen any shift in terms of going to larger cars versus going to smaller cars, or vice versa? Just because maybe people can't travel internationally anymore, perhaps they're buying more SUVs to go and travel in Australia, or there's simply nothing like that in the reports or the research that you...
No, a general trend has been, I think we've covered it in a couple of our articles, I think it's pretty common and widespread knowledge that there's been a massive move, a massive shift away from sedan type vehicles, family sedan vehicles, into SUV sort of segment, right? I think that was it's more an organic move rather than anything COVID related, and has been in the works for the last 5 years or so, where we've had this shift in the market where every single car manufacturer has at least 2 SUVs in their arsenal, in their heavy, in their primary vehicles. And I could probably count on a couple of fingers the amount of sedans on the market. It's just the way the market has shifted. I don't think COVID or a lack of travel has done anything to that. Those wheels were already in motion before.
Thank you.
Right. So I think given our time, I probably think this is time to say thank you to Roger. Thank you very much, Roger, for joining us today and presenting IBIS's view on the world. Well, view on Australia. And I think it's incredibly valuable to have you present at this very early stage of our semester, because understanding how the market impacts the brand is a critical part of advertising research. So thank you kindly for your time. Now,
Thanks for having me.
No, it's great. So
Thanks,
just
Roger.
I would assume, and I think we've had this discussion, that all 3 universities through our libraries have access to IBIS resources, and I think that's correct.
That's right, yes.
Yeah. So that's a little bit of a hint for students. So use the IBIS resources because they're wonderful, and just access it through your library portal, and so they're magical, and it's great to have that resource. And so thank you for joining us in our virtual cafe too, Roger, and we'll be in touch, and I'll chase you up in terms of any questions, or you can email me and I can redirect them and share those answers.